Rosa had worked for the Morrison family for years, serving quietly in their mansion. She cleaned, cooked, and cared deeply for little Daniel, the young son of Vincent Morrison. Daniel loved Rosa like a second mother. Vincent, a serious man who had lost his wife, was raised by his mother Helen, a cold woman who controlled everything. Helen never liked Rosa. One day, a valuable family jewel went missing. Helen immediately blamed Rosa, the only outsider in the house. Rosa was shocked. Helen didn't wait for investigation. She went to Vincent and insisted Rosa stole it because she needed money. Vincent, unsure but trusting his mother's judgment, told Rosa to leave. Rosa felt heartbroken. After years of loyalty, they believed she was a thief. Police were called. Rosa was taken to the station, humiliated before her neighbors. She had no lawyer, no money, no one to defend her. She was released but told to appear in court. News spread quickly. People whispered behind her back, linking her name to theft, though she'd stolen nothing. Rosa returned to her small house and cried for hours. The worst part wasn't the court summons or public shame. It was losing Daniel. She missed his smile, his hugs. She'd cared for him like her own child. Days later, she received a court letter. She was formally accused and had to prepare for trial. Rosa had never been in a courtroom. She had no money for a lawyer and felt powerless. No one would help. They feared the Morrison family's wealth and influence. Despite the pain, Rosa received hope. Daniel ran away from the mansion to see her. He hugged her tightly and cried, saying he didn't believe his grandmother. Rosa cried too. Daniel brought a drawing showing them holding hands. That moment gave Rosa strength. Even without her job or dignity, she hadn't lost Daniel's love. He was too young to help with lawyers, but his visit gave her courage. Rosa Vesey, Ted a legal aid center, and met a young intern who promised to help. They reviewed everything: where she'd been, what time she cleaned which rooms, who else was in the house. It wasn't much, but Rosa was determined to tell the truth. She would face the Morrisons not as a servant, but as a woman refusing to be crushed by injustice. While Rosa struggled, the Morrison family prepared to win. Helen hired Dr. Marcelo Ribeiro, the city's best lawyer who never lost cases for rich families. Helen wanted Rosa seen as guilty publicly. Soon newspapers published headlines calling Rosa a thief. Her name was destroyed before trial began. Vincent noticed how fast everything moved. He remembered Rosa's care for Daniel, her hard work, never giving them reason to doubt her. But he trusted his mother who'd raised him alone. He stayed silent, stuck between respect for Helen and guilt about Rosa. Daniel felt something was wrong. Rosa wasn't there, and no one explained properly. He asked his father repeatedly where Rosa was, but Vincent gave no clear answer. Helen told Daniel not to worry, saying Rosa did something bad and wouldn't return. Daniel didn't believe it. He remembered Rosa's songs, her help with homework, her warm smile. Nothing felt the same without her. Rosa tried to gather evidence. She remembered security cameras near the room where the jewel was kept, but when she asked about footage, no one gave straight answers. She learned something strange. The camera recording that room was turned off exactly when the jewel went missing. That seemed important, but nobody was interested without evidence of who turned it off. Helen pushed for the trial date to be moved up. Her lawyer prepared statements showing the Morrison family's trustworthiness and Rosa's suspiciousness, even without evidence. Helen spoke to journalists, making off-record comments suggesting Rosa had done this before. Magazines published rumors about Rosa's money problems, all untrue. Rosa saw her image destroyed daily. People who once greeted her now looked away. Trial day approached. Rosa felt heavy pressure. She barely slept. Newspapers still called her criminal. Her court-appointed defender barely spoke to her. Helen made sure the courtroom would be full of reporters and important people. She wanted everyone to see that nobody steals from the Morrison family. Vincent still didn't speak. Daniel stayed quiet but thought about Rosa every night. Rosa arrived at the courthouse early, wearing her old work uniform, all she had. Her hands shook, but she kept her back straight. Inside, people whispered as she walked past. The prosecutor, hired by Helen, called Rosa an opportunist who got too comfortable in a rich house. He painted her as ungrateful, calculated, fake. He showed photos of the missing jewel, described its value, explained Rosa's access to the room. He brought witnesses who supported the Morrison side. Some changed their words to match what the prosecutor needed. Vincent sat near his mother, arms crossed, staring at the floor. He didn't speak or look at Rosa. Helen sat confidently beside him, whispering to her lawyer, smiling when things went her way. In the back, Daniel sat with his nanny. He wasn't supposed to be there, but insisted on coming. He watched the adults talk and accuse. He understood enough. Rosa, who once held his hand when scared, now stood in the middle of this. Daniel didn't believe she'd done anything wrong, but no one asked what he thought. Outside, media was everywhere. Headlines already labeled Rosa guilty. People online posted angry comments. Rosa's face was on the news, her name trending, her life destroyed before the entire country. When Rosa's turn came to speak, she stood slowly and walked to the witness stand. She took a deep breath and said she never touched anything that didn't belong to her. She'd worked in that house for years, giving her best every day. She loved Daniel like her own child. Her voice cracked once, but she didn't cry. When she finished, most people didn't react. It was as if her words had no weight. Small inconsistencies began appearing. A few people close to the Morrisons were suddenly unavailable. The old housekeeper was mysteriously removed from her position. A younger maid quietly mentioned seeing Helen entering the jewelry room late at night before the jewel disappeared, but quickly backed off, afraid of losing her job. Fear was everywhere. Daniel started remembering something that happened the night the jewel disappeared. He'd seen someone moving near the jewelry room when he got up for water. When he told his grandmother the next morning, she said it was just a dream, and not to mention it again. He believed her then. But now, after seeing Rosa in court, he wasn't sure anymore. Daniel tried talking to Vincent about what he remembered, but Vincent seemed distracted and didn't listen. Helen noticed Daniel acting differently. He asked more questions and didn't seem interested in toys she bought. She realized he was thinking too much about Rosa and the trial. She told Daniel not to worry about grown-up problems and started spoiling him with gifts. When Daniel mentioned again that he remembered something from the night of the theft, Helen smiled and said she believed him, but it was better not to say anything. She said people might get confused and blame him. Scared, Daniel stopped asking. One afternoon, as Rosa returned home, tired and drained, she heard a knock. A young woman stood there holding a folder. She introduced herself as Sophia, a new lawyer just starting her career. Sophia had followed Rosa's case in the news and felt something wasn't right. She believed Rosa was telling the truth. Rosa was surprised. No one had believed her in weeks. Sophia asked to represent her officially. Rosa hesitated but quickly agreed. She had nothing to lose. Sophia began reviewing everything. She stayed up late reading court transcripts, watching news reports, writing down every detail Rosa shared. She noticed inconsistent statements. She found it strange nobody questioned why the main security camera in the jewelry room was turned off that night. Sophia went to the courthouse to file paperwork officially replacing Rosa's old defender. The judge agreed, warning Sophia this case was complicated and risky. Sophia didn't back down. Sophia started her investigation carefully. She visited courthouse archives, asked for every document related to the Morrison mansion and the supposed theft. Reading through reports, she noticed small mistakes that didn't make sense. Times didn't match. Notes from officers were incomplete. The record about the broken camera seemed too vague. Sophia compared information with Rosa's statements. Things didn't align. Vincent was under growing pressure. Media kept asking questions, and people began whispering that the Morrisons were hiding details. One night, he sat alone in his office and opened old recordings on his computer. He wanted to remember better times. Scrolling through files, he found a video of Rosa with Daniel taken after his wife's death. In the video, Rosa sat with the boy in his room, comforting him while he cried. She told him he was loved and safe, holding him until he calmed down. Watching the scene, Vincent felt something shift inside. He realized Rosa had been more than an employee. She'd been family. For the first time, he doubted his mother's certainty. Sophia's search led to an important discovery. She managed to speak with someone who'd attended a charity event days after the night the jewel supposedly disappeared. That person saw Helen Morrison wearing the exact same jewel at the event. Sophia was shocked. If the jewel was on Helen's neck at the gala, it was never stolen. She quickly looked for photos or articles from the event. Briefly, she found one picture online showing Helen in a dark dress with the jewel shining around her neck. Excited, she saved it to add to Rosa's defense. But the next day, the photo was gone. The website had removed it, and the source refused to talk. Evidence had been erased overnight. Sophia realized Helen's influence reached far beyond the courtroom. She had power to make things disappear. On the third trial day, the atmosphere was tense. The judge sat in his chair, lawyers prepared notes, and Rosa tried to remain calm. Sophia whispered encouragement. The Morrison family occupied their usual seats with Helen looking confident. Vincent sat quietly. Suddenly, the heavy courtroom doors opened and Daniel slipped inside, having escaped from his nanny. People turned in surprise as the boy ran straight to Rosa. Without hesitation, he wrapped his arms around her waist. Then in a loud voice he said, "I know who did this!" The entire courtroom froze. Journalists raised cameras. People murmured. The judge called for order. Rosa held Daniel close, unsure what was happening. Helen's face turned pale, and Vincent immediately stood. The judge asked for the boy to be removed, but Vincent interrupted. His voice shaking, he said Daniel should be allowed to speak. His son had been quiet for weeks, holding something inside, and now he needed to be heard. After short hesitation, the judge agreed. Daniel looked around nervously, then at Rosa before speaking. His small voice filled the silence. He said that one night, after waking for water, he saw his grandmother Helen in the office. He saw her holding something shiny and hiding it inside a box. He also heard her whisper to herself that Rosa would be an easy target. Everyone went silent. The prosecutor quickly argued that Daniel was just a child too young to understand what he saw. He said children often confuse dreams with reality. Daniel didn't back down. He insisted he was telling the truth. He described the box where Helen had hid. The jewel, a dark wooden box with a golden lock kept inside her office desk. He repeated the exact words she'd said. "Rosa will be an easy target." The details were too specific to ignore. People exchanged looks, whispering. Even the judge frowned, realizing Daniel's testimony couldn't be dismissed easily. Rosa stood frozen, heart racing. She couldn't believe Daniel had spoken up before everyone. Tears filled her eyes, not from sadness, but relief. For the first time since the nightmare began, someone told the truth out loud, and it came from the person she loved most. Sophia immediately rose and told the judge that Daniel's statement was crucial and must be investigated. She pointed out the boy had no reason to lie, and his details matched inconsistencies already found. The judge agreed to pause the session and ordered inquiry into Daniel's testimony. Vincent, standing nearby, looked torn between shock and guilt. He finally met Rosa's eyes, and what he saw made him lower his head in shame. Helen, who'd controlled every part of the process until then, showed her first signs of weakness. She tried to stay calm, but her lips trembled slightly. The judge announced the trial would be temporarily suspended. Officers were instructed to review the office in the mansion and check for the wooden box Daniel described. Sophia smiled faintly at Rosa, whispering this was their chance. Rosa, though overwhelmed, felt hope. For weeks, nobody believed her. Now truth was finally surfacing through Daniel's courage. With investigation now open, the Morrison mansion felt different. Tension grew in every corner. Vincent decided he could no longer stay silent. He waited until Daniel was asleep, then went to his mother's office. Helen was sitting behind her desk, pretending to read. Vincent closed the door and demanded the truth. His voice was firm, louder than ever before. He asked why Daniel described her actions so clearly, why the box matched details no child could invent. Helen looked at him with sharp eyes, but realized her control was slipping. Vincent pressed again, saying he couldn't continue defending her without explanation. Finally, Helen stood. She began speaking, her voice calm but filled with bitterness. The conversation turned into heated argument. Vincent accused his mother of destroying Rosa's life without evidence. Helen answered by saying Rosa had been growing too close to Daniel, filling a role that didn't belong to her. She said Daniel saw Rosa as a mother, and even Vincent looked at her differently, almost as if Rosa was replacing his late wife. Helen's tone was cold but emotional. She admitted she felt threatened. She feared Rosa would take control of the family, and she couldn't allow that. Helen explained she never intended to cause so much damage. Her original plan was only to scare Rosa, to remind her of her place. But things escalated when the jewel went missing. Once suspicion fell on Rosa, she let the lie continue, thinking it would protect her family's legacy. Vincent listened in silence, devastated. He realized his mother's fear had blinded them all, and his silence made him part of the injustice. Vincent walked out of the office in shock. He went to Daniel's room and sat beside his sleeping son. He thought about how Daniel had been braver than him, speaking truth when adults stayed quiet. That night, Vincent made a decision. He went back to Helen's office, not to argue, but to search. He opened drawers, moved books, and finally discovered a small safe hidden behind a cabinet. After several attempts, he managed to open it with a key from Helen's desk. Inside, he saw the missing jewel carefully wrapped in cloth. But that wasn't all. The safe contained envelopes with money, documents, and other items that didn't seem to belong there. Vincent stared at the contents, realizing this was proof that could finally change everything. The next morning, Vincent didn't hesitate. He carried the safe to the police station and handed it over. Officers were surprised, but immediately began taking notes and recording evidence. Vincent explained where he'd found it and how it confirmed Daniel's testimony. He admitted his mother had been hiding the jewel and possibly other valuables. The police thanked him and promised to include the discovery in investigation. Vincent felt relief mixed with guilt. He'd done the right thing now, but too late to undo damage Rosa had already suffered. Outside the station, reporters were waiting. News spread quickly. Headlines changed overnight. Instead of calling Rosa a thief, media began focusing on Helen Morrison's involvement. The public, who'd been quick to judge Rosa, started questioning the family's power and secrets. For the first time, Rosa's name appeared alongside words like innocence and injustice. When court reconvened, Sophia presented discovery of the jewel, explaining it had been found hidden inside Helen's office safe. She pointed out other suspicious items, suggesting there could be more behind the story. The judge allowed Rosa to speak again. She told her story with more confidence. Her voice was steady as she repeated she'd never stolen anything. She talked about her years of loyalty, her love for Daniel, her respect for the Morrison household. The courtroom listened closely. This time, people didn't dismiss her words. Reporters wrote down every detail. Cameras focused on her face. Even members of the public who once believed she was guilty now felt sympathy. Sophia's arguments grew stronger, supported by physical evidence. The entire case shifted. Rosa was no longer seen as the accused, but as victim of a powerful family's lies. Helen was forced to sit in the courtroom and watch truth unfold. For the first time, her control was gone. She didn't speak, eyes fixed on the floor. Vincent sat on the other side, holding Daniel close, finally breaking free from his mother's influence. He felt ashamed for not protecting Rosa sooner, but was determined to, support her now. With the safe evidence and Vincent's testimony now part of the case, the courtroom atmosphere changed completely. Sophia stood before the judge with carefully prepared presentation. She showed a timeline of events, starting with the night the jewel disappeared and ending with discovery of Helen's secret safe. Every step revealed how Helen manipulated the situation, creating false narrative that made Rosa look guilty. The prosecution tried to interrupt, but the judge allowed Sophia to continue. Evidence was too strong to ignore. Rosa, sitting beside her lawyer, felt her hands shaking, but this time from relief. For the first time in months, she wasn't invisible. Her truth was being spoken out loud. The judge listened carefully, taking notes as Sophia explained each point. She showed how Rosa's access to the jewelry room had been exaggerated, how the broken camera had been conveniently ignored, how witnesses were influenced by Helen's power. Sophia then connected these details with the jewel being seen at the charity event, tying pieces together. Vincent stood and confirmed his part, admitting his silence had made him an accomplice. His words were heavy but honest. The courtroom reacted with murmurs of surprise. Helen, sitting in the front row, remained stiff, lips pressed tightly together. She avoided eye contact with everyone, especially Vincent and Daniel. The judge finally raised her hand and declared the process had been flawed from the beginning. She said Rosa should never have been held under suspicion so long without proper evidence. With that, she announced Rosa's immediate release. The courtroom filled with noise, some gasps, some applause. As soon as the decision was spoken, Daniel broke free from his nanny's grasp and ran across the room. Without hesitation, he jumped into Rosa's arms, holding her tightly. "You're my heart, Mommy," he shouted. That words touched everyone present. Some people cried, others clapped softly, moved by the child's honesty and love. Rosa hugged Daniel with all her strength, tears streaming down her face. She whispered she would never leave him, no matter what people had said before. For Rosa, that moment meant more than the judge's ruling. It was proof she still had Daniel's love and trust. Outside the courthouse, media exploded with news. For weeks, headlines had called Rosa a thief, a liar, a disgrace. Now those same outlets wrote stories describing her as brave, strong, innocent. Television anchors spoke about injustice, while online articles praised her dignity throughout the ordeal. Comment sections filled with people apologizing for judging too quickly. Some called Rosa a symbol of resistance against abuse of power. For Rosa, however, media noise wasn't important. She didn't want fame or revenge. All she wanted was her name cleared and her life back. She told Sophia she didn't plan to sue the family or demand money. Her only goal was to walk freely without shame and live without people whispering behind her back. Sophia admired her humility, knowing many in her place would have demanded more. Rosa's victory was not about punishing Helen, but about regaining her dignity. Vincent took the opportunity to address the press gathered outside. He admitted publicly he'd failed Rosa by believing his mother without proof. He explained how he'd allowed her influence to silence him and how his silence caused harm. Reporters asked difficult questions, but Vincent didn't hide. He apologized directly to Rosa, not as legal strategy, but as a father and man who'd been wrong. Rosa listened quietly, not answering right away, but her eyes showed she appreciated his honesty. Daniel stood by Vincent's side, smiling for the first time in weeks. The boy's relief was visible, as if the heavy burden he carried had finally been lifted. For the first time since trial began, father and son stood together, united in truth rather than fear. Rosa felt grateful for Daniel's courage and Vincent's change of heart. For her, their sincerity was enough to begin healing. Helen, however, could not escape consequences. The judge announced she would be called to new hearing to answer for her actions. Discovery of the jewel, manipulation of witnesses, and her attempt to frame Rosa were now part of new case. Helen didn't react outwardly, but her pale face betrayed her shock. She was escorted out by her lawyer, who avoided the press. Reporters shouted her name demanding answers, but she said nothing. When court reconvened, Helen made one last attempt to regain control. She raised her head high, spoke with authority, tried to convince the judge and jury that everything said against her was false. She insisted Daniel was confused, Vincent was emotional, and Rosa was manipulating the situation through sympathy. For a moment, the courtroom was quiet. Then Sophia stood up with documents and testimonies she'd gathered. She presented written statements from staff who'd left the mansion, people now willing to talk. With Helen's influence weakened, they admitted details they'd been too afraid to share before. One maid confessed Helen had pressured her to lie during first hearings. Another employee revealed Helen often used intimidation to control staff. Slowly, Helen's arguments fell apart. The more she tried to defend herself, the more her words looked desperate and hollow. As testimonies continued, shocking details from the past came to light. It was revealed this wasn't the first time Helen had accused an employee of theft without proof. Years earlier, a gardener had been dismissed under similar circumstances. Another worker admitted she'd been threatened by Helen after refusing to cover up an incident. The courtroom gasped as these stories surfaced. They painted a pattern of behavior showing Helen's obsession with control and willingness to destroy others to protect her image. The prosecutor, who at the beginning had been firmly on her side, changed his stance. He asked for criminal investigation against Helen, listing charges such as perjury, defamation, and obstruction of justice. The judge nodded and agreed the matter could no longer be ignored. Helen, who once appeared untouchable, now sat in silence, exposed before everyone. Rosa listened to everything, tears in her eyes, not tears of pain but relief. After so many humiliations, so many days of doubt, she was finally hearing truth acknowledged before the world. The judge declared her officially innocent, clearing her of all charges. The courtroom erupted with noise as reporters sent the news across the country. On live broadcasts, Rosa's name appeared with words like "innocence confirmed" and "justice done." Rosa held Daniel's hand tightly as she left the courthouse, no longer ashamed. Outside, people clapped. Some even apologized directly for believing false accusations. She felt weight lift from her chest. Her life had been broken apart by lies, but her name was clean again. This was all she'd wanted from the beginning. Not revenge, but truth. Margaret entered the courtroom, but this time she was no longer the accuser. She was the one at the defendant's table, facing the same justice system she once controlled with money and influence. Evidence against her was overwhelming. The jewel had been found inside her own safe. Testimonies from former employees confirmed her history of intimidation and lies. Records revealed money transfers and valuables hidden without proper documentation. The prosecutor listed charges clearly: false accusation, harassment, and misappropriation of family assets. Helen sat still, her once proud posture now heavy with shame. She tried to defend herself, saying everything she did was for the good of her family, but her words carried no weight. The judge listened, considered the facts, and gave the verdict: guilty. Her sentence was strict but fair: house arrest, heavy financial penalty, and permanent removal from any control over the Morrison fortune. Vincent watched with mixed emotions. He'd grown up obeying his mother's every word, but now saw her stripped of the power she'd used so long. When sentence was read, he didn't feel joy. Instead, he felt deep sadness knowing how far she'd gone to hold on to control. But at the same time, he knew it was necessary. Justice had to be done. Once court was adjourned, Vincent officially stepped into his new role as leader of the Morrison businesses. Reporters asked how he planned to move forward. His answer surprised many. The family empire would no longer operate with arrogance or fear. He promised to lead with transparency, fairness, and respect for all workers. His first step was to rebuild trust, starting with Rosa. Vincent reached out to Rosa personally. He met her not as employer or accuser, but as someone who respected her strength. He told her he'd been inspired by her courage and by the injustice she endured. He shared an idea for a foundation dedicated to helping women who'd been falsely accused or unfairly treated just like her. Vincent admitted the idea came from seeing Rosa's suffering and her determination to keep her dignity. Rosa listened carefully. She didn't want to return to the mansion or her old life as servant. But when Vincent explained she would not work as staff but as director of the foundation, Rosa smiled. This was different, a chance to use her painful story to help others. Rosa accepted, not out of obligation but because she believed something good could come from everything she'd endured. It was the beginning of a new chapter, one she chose freely. Sophia celebrated Rosa's decision. The young lawyer saw her former client now stepping into a leadership role she fully deserved. At the foundation's announcement, journalists called Rosa a symbol of resistance and dignity. But Rosa herself avoided those titles. She insisted she was just a woman who wanted to live honestly. Still, she worked with Sophia to shape the foundation's mission, providing legal aid, emotional support, and opportunities for women silenced by power. Vincent provided the funding, but Rosa made the rules. She was no longer cleaning floors or living under suspicion. She was directing meetings, hiring staff, and planning campaigns. For Sophia, watching Rosa grow into this role was proof that justice wasn't only about courtrooms. It was about giving people back their voices. The foundation became a living example that truth could survive even against wealth and influence. Rosa's name now carried respect, not shame. Daniel adjusted to the changes better than anyone expected. He still spent time with his father, visiting the Morrison estate when necessary, but preferred being with Rosa. He told her once in his innocent way that she was his real mom in the heart. Rosa smiled and told him he would always be part of her life. Vincent supported their bond. Understanding Daniel's happiness depended on feeling safe and loved. He no longer tried to erase Rosa's presence from their lives. Instead, he encouraged it. For Daniel, the two worlds finally made sense. The luxury of his father's side and the warmth of Rosa's care. He knew exactly where love and truth lived. Whenever he looked at Rosa, he remembered the courage it took for her to stand strong when everyone turned against her. Daniel's laughter returned. His nightmares faded. He once again felt like a child, free to dream. As months passed, Rosa learned to breathe again. The fear that once followed her disappeared. She walked through the city without shame, no longer hiding from people's eyes. She worked hard at the foundation, but also allowed herself moments of rest, surrounded by Daniel's joy and Sophia's friendship. One evening after a long day, Rosa stepped outside and watched the sunset. The colors in the sky reminded her of everything she'd survived. She thought of the courtroom, the lies, the humiliation, and the pain. But now she was free, and she didn't need to shout or fight anymore. The truth had spoken for itself, and it had won. Rosa closed her eyes, letting the peace sink in. For the first time in a long while, her heart was calm. The story that began with accusations ended with justice. The sun disappeared slowly, and Rosa smiled, knowing she had found her place in the world again.